Hi, folks. Thanks for coming out tonight in this gorgeous, very autumnal night we have out there to learn about this. My name is Matt Blazek. I'm I'll tell you about the second. So today we'll be talking about Maine's First Ship, which is the organization that I work for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to be tell you a little about the history behind what Maine's First Ship is, the actual history of it, then the history of the organization, and then a little bit about the future and what we're doing there with the organization. So, of course, I want to. So, like I said, my name is Matt Blazek. I'm the Director of Education and Educational Outreach for Maine's First Ship. I am also, hello, hi. Good, how are you doing tonight? I am also a certified interpretive guide with the National Association of Interpreters, which is a certification body for all sort of historical. They do a lot of state park employees, things like that, certifying them. I'm also a certified heritage interpreter, and I'm a longtime historical reenactor and history lover. And that's basically how I got involved with Maine's First Ship is uh, doing history, teaching history, going to schools to teach history, and getting in to do some of the historical hands-on stuff with them. So a little about Maine's First Ship to begin with, just to start. So we are a 501c3 educational nonprofit that strives to use our reconstruction of the 1607 Pinnace, Virginia, that was built by the Popham colonists in Phippsburg, to teach about history, to get people involved in history with hands-on things, sales, all sorts of different things. But our main goal is using this ship. But we also have more than the ship. We have a visitor center, the Jane Stevens Visitors and Learning Center, down in Bath. It's at the old Bath Freight Shed right on Commercial Street. It's right there on the water. That's where the ship is during the summer, in the spring and the fall. She usually leaves during the winter because the Kennebec is not a safe place to keep a ship like this over the winter. She does stay in the water over the winter. So you can usually see her at the public landing in Wiscasset. Last year she was in South Freeport for the winter, but I think we're going to Wiscasset this year. So you can usually see her coming up over the bridge when you're coming through Wiscasset. So I always like to start off with some pictures of the ship because she is just pretty. She's a very pretty vessel. That's us coming back from Pemaquid. We go to a colonial living history days in Pemaquid every July, and that's coming back from one of those events. So that's coming up coming around near the point there, probably coming around East Booth Bay before we head out to get her back around Phippsburg and coming up the Kennebec. That's where we're docked on the Kennebec. We're right next to the bridge. So if you're going southbound on the bridge and you look over during the summer, if she's not out, you can see her there. You can't see her northbound, of course. Well, you can sort of see her northbound. But it's basically BIW's on the south side, downriver side of the bridge, and then we're right on the upriver side of the bridge. Exactly. If you're going south, you look on your right. This is our main space, which is in Bath. So this is right in downtown Bath. Yep. Oop, I'm going too fast. This is another picture grabbed by one of our fans. This is again coming back from that event in Pemaquid. That's us towing our shallop Jane Stephen. It's sort of our boat tender. It's actually the first boat that the project built with the Morse High School kids. So we use her. She's fun to row, and we take her as our sort of lifeboat and tender. We do have a regular inflatable life raft on board for long voyages, but we also use this one as sort of our backup. People love to know where we're going so they can do stuff like this, which is sort of drive up and down the river looking for us and taking pictures of us from the woods. Or, if you can see in this next one, I love this next photo, that's looking out of Fort St. George at Popham Beach. So as we're coming by, probably going back up the river for that one. And this is her right off of Popham Beach, probably during that same transit. It's great to see her. We have lots of great pictures of her in the fog because it sort of makes everything else disappear, and it makes her look like she is right, right back in time with her there. So, and this is in Boothbay during we go to the Boothbay Windjammer Festival. We'll be at the Camden Windjammer Festival this weekend. She's actually, depending on where you live, she's spending the night moored off, or at anchor, sorry, not moored, at anchor off of St. George between, I think it's Bailey Island is one of the islands down there that she's off of. And that's during the Parade of Sail at Boothbay a couple of years ago as well. So, I'm going to sort of talk about what is Maine's first ship about. And we have three pillars, as you may have seen if you saw the opening slide. It says history, ingenuity, and community. And those are the three pillars that that drives us in everything that we talk about and everything that we do, is history, ingenuity, and community. So the first pillar of that being history. What is it about? It's about history. It's about the Wabanaki and the Popham Colony. So we do acknowledge that the land that the Popham Colony was built on in Phippsburg is traditionally the native land of the Wabanaki, specifically the Penobscot tribe. They would have been the tribe that the Popham colonists encountered in 1607 and before that in this area as they were scouting to find a place to build the colony. And these pictures here, so anybody here know anything about the Popham Colony? Not really? No, and that's the point. That's why we built this ship. So the Popham Colony was a very short-lived English colony in between 1607 and 1608 at the mouth of the Sagadahoc River, which is now called the Kennebec River, down in Phippsburg. And if you look up in the corner here, you have this map. And what that map is, that shows there were two companies here. There was the Virginia Company of Sagadahoc, which was this area up here, which is what the Popham Colony was. And then there was the Virginia Company of Jamestown. So Jamestown, which everybody's heard of, basically, if you follow American history or colonial history, which is the first lasting English colony in what would become the United States. Jamestown and Popham were actually sister colonies. So they were formed under the same charter with each other. And they were formed for a number of different reasons. Basically, James I in 1607, he signed this charter creating the Virginia Company that had the two different sections of Jamestown and Sagadahoc. And he did this because, to very, very boil it down very briefly, he needed money. And these early colonial ventures were ways to make money. So they were sending people over here to find trade routes, to set up trade relations with the indigenous people, to harvest fish, crops, timber, furs, anything that they could bring back to England to make the crown money. They got to keep a portion of that, of course. It was a good way for these investors to get a lot of money fairly easily on their part because all they had to do was give money to set up. They weren't the ones coming over here and living and dying and trying to figure out how to get back. And James was really behind the eight ball because France had a colony, up north here along the St. John for about 40 years before they sent the Popham colonists and the Jamestown colonists over. And Spain had a colony down in Florida, St. Augustine, for almost 100 years before England had anybody over here. So James I really needed to get these things going. One of the other problems he had was he had a lot of bored soldiers and sailors hanging around. When Elizabeth died in 1603, it ended what was called the Anglo-Spanish War. If you ever heard of the Spanish Armada, where Spain sent their great fleet over and Elizabeth was able to push them back and win the day and nobody ever invaded. That was part of the Anglo-Spanish War. It was basically Spain throwing a temper tantrum because Elizabeth wouldn't marry him. So that ended. But James and Elizabeth had basically, during this time, fought this by making piracy legal She had her navy was basically privateers, as they were called, or legal pirates. So now you had a bunch of bored soldiers and sailors out there who were used to being pirates and going out and taking whatever they wanted, who couldn't do that to the Spanish anymore. So what do you do with people that are doing that are bored and need something to do? You send them over to North America. You give them something to do, and it gets them out of your hair. So he was sending people over to do that. He was sending people over to get a foothold, to make money, and sort of expansion at the same time. England also at this time had a population problem. They had too many people for that small island they had, for their resources. So they had to send them over. But the biggest part of it, it was a great way for them to make money. This region wasn't completely unknown to them either. Fishermen, European fishermen had been fishing off the coasts of Maine, what would become Maine and Virginia, for almost 100 years prior to any of the English colonists being here. So the Wabanaki had a good idea of how to interact with these people. They knew the land very well. This is a print of one of Champlain's maps from 1605, which was 2 years before the colonists were sent over, depicting basically where they were going to show up. And so this is the mouth of the Kennebec River, and Popham was basically right here, right where all those houses were. And those don't depict European houses; those depict the Wabanaki, the Penobscot houses that were down there already. So everybody knew who was here already, and what was here, and what they could come and they could take. Here we just have an illustration based off of a map, which I'll go to in a second, what the colony could have looked like when they built it. And then down here is what it looks like today. If you didn't know that there had been something here, you never would have known that there was anything here. I did it again. So the next part, it's about history. It's about the archaeological finds, so digging into the actual history of the Popham Colony. This isn't my computer, sorry, so I'm very... There we go. So between 1997 and 2013, they actually started into archaeological digs at the Phippsburg site, where they would discover that the Popham Colony was. It was headed by this man, Professor Jeffrey Brain, an archaeologist from the Peabody Essex Museum. And over this course of time, that 97 to 2013, they led a series of digs. And they found a lot of stuff, but nothing that definitively put it as this could have been the Popham Colony. They definitely found a lot of Wabanaki artifacts. They found a lot of English artifacts as well from the time, a piece of a Belmarine or Bartman jug, some coins that dated it to roughly around the time period. So the coins they found were minted between 1592 and 1595. So about a decade before the colonists came over. But it's like today. If you reach into your pocket and pull out a penny, you might find one from 1950 something. So having older coins doesn't necessarily mean that they still didn't have any monetary value. It wasn't until one of the last digs in 1997 they found this. That, it looks like a big pile of dirt and it doesn't look like anything. I know. But that is actually the remnants of a post hole that shows that there was a structure there. And that was the post hole to the chapel. And that's basically what they finally were able to say, we found it, this is where the Popham Colony was. And the reason I say we found it is, for the long time, nobody actually knew where this colony site had been. There had always been rumors in Phippsburg that there had been something on this peninsula called Sabino Head, or Sabino Head, they say it that way down there. Some scholars believed that the Popham Colony may have been the same place as the Pemaquid Colony, and it was just being confused as being its own thing. We know now that that's not the fact. The Pemaquid Colony was later than the Popham Colony. There are writings of people talking about this colony site, not necessarily exactly where it was, but this colony site a couple of decades after they left. So they knew that there was something in this area, but nobody knew exactly where. So how did this post hole basically shed light, how is that the smoking gun on this being the Popham Colony? Well, all has to do with this map, the John Hunt map. John Hunt actually came to the colony. He was there as it was being put together, and he drew this map. There's some issues with this map. One, if you look at this map, this shows a very complete colony. It shows a stone wall, it shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 cannons. It shows, a big gated archway. It shows a number of houses, gardens. It shows the ship over in the corner. They were only here for 14 months. And in the first half of them being here, half the colonists got sent home in December because they didn't have enough food. So when they first came over, they brought over 120 men and boys. Boys not being little kids, boys being probably, could have been teenagers, could have been anybody under the age of 30 who was not yet married. It could have been servant, a term for sort of servants, things like that. So it wasn't little kids, but in the documents it says men and boys. They probably did not, well, I don't even say probably, they definitely did not build this big of a structure in 14 months with 60 people and build a ship. And we know for a fact they built the ship. So that's an issue with this map. Why would he send this out there? Another issue with this map is that this was found in a Spanish library in the 1800s. So 200 years after the colony, this map was found there. We do know that the map is legitimate. It is a 1607 map done by John Hunt. So it leads to some questions. How did it get into a Spanish library? Why is it depicting such a huge construction? What does this mean? There's a couple of theories about that. So some people think it was something to show James I, this is what we're going to build for you. This is, we're going to build this huge fort for you. It's going to have all these cannons. It's going to be great. There's another theory that this is a giant piece of propaganda that the Spanish were meant to find. It was basically saying, don't come looking for us. We've built this huge fort here. We've got all these cannons. You don't want to mess with us. Because the Spanish knew the English were over here. They didn't know where. And the French knew that the English were over here, but they didn't really know where. So I wouldn't want to go looking for a fortification like that. Because that shows like a permanent space in this area, not to come after us. So a lot of people think that it may have actually been meant to fall into Spanish hands for them to find it and not try to pick a fight with the English. But still, how does this map help us realize that the archaeological digs were the site? Well, Dr. Brain had a very interesting idea. He looked at where he was digging, and he looked at this map, and he overlaid them. So when you overlay these, the colony site on the John Hunt map fits almost perfectly to the topography of Sabino Head. And when they started doing diggings, when they looked at the John Hunt map and they looked at that post hole, it lined up almost perfectly to the depiction of the chapel in the John Hunt map. So they know that they built at least some of the buildings. We know that they built through the digs and through writings. They built a chapel. They built a couple of storage houses. They built a house for George Popham, who was the head of the colony. That's why we call it the Popham Colony. and for his lieutenant, who was Raleigh Gilbert, who was second in command. Raleigh Gilbert was, the name Raleigh, he was the nephew of Sir Walter Raleigh, Elizabeth's favorite pirate, as some people call him. So it would have been, let's see if I can go back. So this right here. I believe the post that they found was right about here, like one of the corners there. So. As they kept digging, they did find additional post holes. So that's what they basically found that on in the last week of digging in the 1997 dig. They were about to give up, and then they found that, and that opened the doors for everything. So this is also about the history of the project itself, the Virginia Project, as Maine's first ship was originally called. A lot of people don't know this, but we were started in 1997. So we're almost getting up to our 30th anniversary as an organization and for this project. So even though the ship is fairly brand new compared to the rest of the project, we've been around for quite a long time. So it was started basically by this woman up here, and we'll talk about her a little bit more later, a woman named Jane Stephen. And there's a man named Bud Warren, and I forget the other person's name because I've never found it listed with any part of the photos of him, so I haven't found anybody yet to tell me who his name is. They had this idea they were the ones actually so Jane owned property that basically abuts where the colony site was, and part of her garden was where they were doing the digs of it. So she was right there, and she had always heard rumors about the colony. She had she had found pottery shards when she'd been doing digging, and people had been doing landscaping around the place. They would dig up pottery shards and stuff. So she's the one who got into her head to contact Dr. Brain of the Peabody Essex, and he came up and they started doing the digs. And they said, well, this is really amazing, but like I asked earlier, who here knows anything about the Popham Colony? And nobody raised their hand, and which is why this was started. They said, what can we do to sort of shed light on this, to show this amazing piece of history that happened right in our backyard and bring it to light? So they did a little more research on their own, and in the writings they found that the Popham Colony in 1607 built the first English-built ocean-going vessel in North America, the Virginia, as she was called. And she originally went, we'll talk a little more detail about the historical one, but she did at least 2 transatlantic voyages, and was built, this boat right here, yeah. Well, not this one specifically, but the boat itself, yes, the boat, it's the original one, 2 transatlantic voyages. So they started working on this project, and well, how are we going to do that? They started with our shallop, Jane Stevens, named after her, of course. They built that with the Morse High School students in around 2009 as sort of a proof of concept. Can we actually do this with volunteers? Can we do it? And they said, yes, we can. So they decided to work on the real thing. They worked with a number of different marine designers, marine architects. John Wyman of Castine did the original designs for our rebuild of Virginia. Rob Stevens, who's a well-known shipwright, if you're part of the boating world, did most of the lead work on her. So in 2011, they laid the keel, and then in 2022, we launched her. So it took them 11 years to build this ship. It only took the colonists 10 months to build the original, so I guess we weren't as good as we thought, but we're not professionals. We're all volunteers. She is 99% volunteer built. So our second pillar, it's ingenuity. So we celebrate a couple of different types of ingenuity here. We celebrate the ingenuity of the past. We celebrate the ingenuity of the Wabanaki. A lot of people talk about the exchange of technology from the Europeans to the indigenous, that the Europeans came over and they had all this amazing technology that was like magic to them, and they were quick to adopt it. What we don't talk about is that actually happened a lot on the reverse. The Europeans came and started adopting things that the native people were doing because they worked better for this place. And nothing better illustrates that than the birch bark canoe. So when Europeans came over here and they started exploring the inland waterways, they quickly found out that those shallops, the rowboats that they use, were horrible. For the one reason was they sit very low in the water, so you can't go up in very shallow water. And they weigh a ton. You can't portage one of those shallops. You need like 50 guys to pick them up out of the water and move. And if you have anything in it, you need even more than that because they weigh a ton. So they quickly adapted and adopted the use of the birch bark canoe. And we know that they did this, and the dugout canoe as well, because we know they did this. There's lots of writings talking about colonists getting in canoes and rowing across the bay to go to a party at somebody's house or something like that. So they were using these as their regular modes of transportation pretty quickly after arriving. We do celebrate the ingenuity of the colonists that came here because their writings say that this was the harshest winter any of them had ever endured. Because it's the coast of Maine, it's cold. And if anybody's ever been through an English winter, they're not that bad compared to over here. So they said it was the coldest winter they've ever endured. The mouth of the Sagadahoc, the Kennebec, froze over, of course, as she usually does. And it was very hard for them to endure. But they were still able to power through and build this ship. And we're fairly certain that they'd purposely decided to build a ship before they came because they probably brought a lot of stuff with them to do it, like the sails, the rigging, the ironwork. Although they did have a forge, they did find evidence of a forge in the archaeological digs. They probably brought a lot of the ironwork along with them. We also celebrate the ingenuity of our volunteers. Like I said, she was 99% volunteer built. And they had to do a lot of research on it. So in that John Hunt map I showed you earlier, let me backtrack for a second. We don't actually know what the original Virginia looked like. There was no detailed written description of her. The only written description was that she shall be a pretty pinnace of about 30 ton. We'll talk about that more in a second as well. And the only drawing that could have been Virginia was in that John Hunt map. And it was this one here. Now that may have been Virginia. It may have been one of the supply ships that had stayed with the colonists as they were here, because one of the larger ships did. It could have just been the map maker drawing a ship over there to say, this is water. So we don't know 100% if that was the original depiction of Virginia. So how do we get from this drawing to this? And we had to do a lot of research. So like I said, the only written description was that she shall be a pretty pinnace of 30 ton. And that's pretty meaning very stout, well-built, not beautiful, although I think the ship now is fairly beautiful. And pinnace meaning for coastal waters. So it was a very small craft. Sometimes larger craft would use these as their tenders, but they were built for going up the coast, up the big wide rivers, dropping people off as they rode onto land, gathering supplies, bringing them back to their sort of main hub of activity, which the bigger supply ships would then take them back across the ocean. And ton being T-O-N-N-E, meaning that wasn't how much she weighed. That was the measurement of volume for how much cargo she could carry inside her. So a ton was a measurement of volume that equaled about 256 gallons. So if her hold was completely empty and open, you could have been able to stuff 256 gallons of goods inside of her. So it's not really that big. So, the reconstruction. Ours is a little bigger than the original. She is 51.5 feet length of deck, about 14.1 feet wide. and she has a 6.5 feet depth, and she's a draft of about 6 feet. So she actually, for a ship of that size, she sits fairly low in the water. So if you do all the math and everything, that equals out to be about 37 ton. And the reason for that is the Coast Guard made us, for every one of the sort of ribs that's inside of the hull, they made us, for every other one, we had to double up to make her more rigid, because originally they wanted to bring lots of passengers on her. So that made her just a bit longer than what the original would have been. She is a caravel build. At this time, there was two predominant styles of ship hulls being built: caravel and clinker. Clinker has the overlapping hull planks, and what's the biggest difference of this is they actually build that first and then build the frame in it. And that makes it lighter because it takes less wood. And it's also easier to caulk because you have the overlapping. What they would do is they would shove moss or other hemp or not hemp, oakum and stuff up inside the boards, and then seal them together and tar it. So it would be easier to caulk. Ours is a caravel built. It's the other style, and that's where the planks actually butt up against each other, and you would have gaps in between them if you didn't, stuff them full of caulk and caulk them. They build the frame first on those, so they're a little more rigid, which allows them to take bigger sail configurations, and we wanted to do a couple of different sail configurations with ours. And then just some of the original blueprints of her. You can see that she has the two masts, and she's really not that big. I am not a boat person to be. This is until I started here, so I was like, oh, she's like 50 feet long. This is a big boat. And the Coast Guard would always say, no, she's tiny. She's not big at all. She's tiny. And then I actually went down to Mystic Seaport a couple of years ago for work, and I saw some of the large wooden ships they have down there out of the water, and I'm like, oh, no, she's absolutely tiny. So. Yes, exactly, and that's exactly what our volunteers did. They researched what a pinnace could look like. The problem with that being is it could look like a bunch of different things. So it really, pinnace was sort of a catch-all term for a stout, smaller ship that wasn't quite, and pinnaces could be slightly larger than what we have our shallop being, with a sail arrangement on her, to almost the size of the Mayflower. So there was a great size range in what they could be. Mostly they range somewhere between 20 and 50 ton vessels, displacement vessels. So they're not huge, but they're not small. They're like a good mid-range cargo style ship. We like to say that if this was doing trucks, this would have been like the F-150 of the day, because that's what they were built for. But like, you look at an F-150 now, and an F-150 could be all sorts of different configurations on them. So there's no set, like this is what it was. But we took a lot of different design elements and sort of incorporated into the one, saying this is what a pinnace of that era could have looked like. Let me see if I can get back here. So, and that's part of the ingenuity of our volunteers. So they had to research and design what the ship could look like, what stylistic elements they wanted to include, what they wanted to not include. I asked our lead shipwright the other day, why did you choose to do a caravel build instead of a clinker build? And he looked at me and he goes, I have no idea. So it was just something they decided to do. They also researched and had to make some of their own tools like some of the mallets and things like that that they would have used to build the ship. And there's Rob, looking, as they're laying some of the ribs there, the supports in the frame. And that's a couple of years later, the frame's built. They're putting the deck on. She is sourced. We tried to source as much as we could from Maine wood. She's mostly pine and white oak. There's also some elm. There's some hackmatack in there. So the white oak was probably the hardest to find. Some of the oak we had to get from Connecticut. So at least it's sort of all New England area, but we had to do a lot of sourcing. They had to figure out how she was going to be rigged, what the rigging looked like, and they had to make the rigging. So all of our rigging, like the block and tackle, those were all made by volunteers. They weren't bought. You can't go to a place and buy to a 17th century block and tackle shop and get the stuff pre-made. So it was made by volunteers by hand. They had a lot of the ropes they had to sort of make and doctor up. We use synthetic rope lines on ours. We don't use hemp rope on our. One, that is a pragmatic for basically not having to replace all the lines every couple of seasons. We want it to last as long as they possibly can because the natural fibers don't last that long. So especially when they're out on the water being used a lot. So it would just be too expensive to keep using the natural stuff. So we'll talk about the rigging. So a lot of people, this is my favorite question. If anybody who knows anything about boats looks at me and says, well, how's she rigged? And I say, she certainly is. Because she is interestingly rigged. She has 5 spars. She is a 32-foot main mast, which is a Bowden pine. I like to call that the most historically accurate piece on the ship, because one of their Bowden King pines blew down a couple of years ago in a storm, and they donated it to us to use as our mast. And that's exactly what those trees were planted for, to be used for mast and spars on the sailing ships of the time. So it was really cool to be able to get one of those. She has 6 sails. The original probably did not have that many masts and sails. She has 100 blocks and pulleys. We calculated it. She probably has around almost 1.5 miles of line on her for the ropes and rigging. And like I said, we use the modern synthetic lines for durability. But she has, so I've learned a little more in the terminology, so if anybody knows anything about boats, they can tell me I'm wrong, but she is a lateen rigged catch, sort of. So she's not exactly the right say, but she is lateen rigged. She's got the lateen mainmast and sprit, and then she's got the mizzen mast with the lateen rig. And then we had to figure out all the sort of everything else, and everybody sort of pitches in. We have a clothing crew that makes costumes for our interpreters. That's our ex-executive director, Kirsty Trueluck. We have a new executive director that just started this year, Alicia Witham. She's been fantastic. But that's Kirsty painting the hull, so below the waterline. She was scraped and trying to finish her up. So everybody sort of pitched in to get her done for the launch. And then, so the ingenuity of our future. We are an educational organization. So we are trying to use the ship and our small collection at the Jane Stevens Visitor Center to teach. We bring kids in. We have volunteers. Again, these are all volunteers that lead these I lead some educational programs, but I'm one of the 3 paid staff that's here, and 2 of us are part-time. So the only full-time staff that we have is our executive director. The other 2 of us are part-time. And then everybody else volunteers their time to come in and do this with us. Work with the kids. That's Phil Helgerson of Damariscotta. He's did a paper boat building class for kids. That was students. I love that picture with the rigging. That's one of our volunteers, Bob Ireland. That was her birthday, and she was very adamant that she was wearing that unicorn horn all day. So, but that was one of the Woolwich Elementary students was out, and he was teaching them how to wrap a line, wrap the end of a line to use. So, um, we have more middle school age kids. We try to do something for almost every age of kids, and we're working on doing more of it. And they're learning about more about the rigging over there with our ex-lead rigger, Jim Nelson, who is an excellent author, a very prolific author. He's done a couple of Viking books. He's done some pirate books. You probably have some here in the library somewhere because he's very, very popular author, fiction books. And then myself talking about the history and sort of the soldier aspect of the Popham Colony, because a lot of them that came over were soldiers. And then finally, the last pillar is community. It's about the people. Our community started with Jane Stevens. Jane Stevens, as I said, she was the heart and soul and main driver of this organization for many years. Unfortunately, she passed away before she could see it sort of come to fruition. She never got to see the ship launch, but we do honor her by, our shallop is named after her, and we have the Jane Stevens Visitors and Learning Center is where we're housed. So that's how we honor Jane. Our volunteer crew, as I said, we are 99% volunteers. They do everything. They work on the rigging. Every season when we take her to Wiscasset or Freeport for the winter, we down rig her. So we take the mast, all the sails down, all the spars down. We take the top mast down. We take the mizzen mast down. We take the bowsprit out. And they do that. And then every spring when we bring her back in May, they put everything right back on again. Usually in the same place it was where they took it off. There's a little discussion about that. They work on putting the docks in, our float in the spring and taking them out in the winter. They've made all the rigging. They varnished the spars. They made the spars. So literally they do everything. While there, like I said, there's 3 paid staff members of us. We do, so with the rigging gang, volunteer interpreters come in to lead the education and take people on fun trips along the Kennebec. Even crazy people have to, we need more young people to come and climb for us. Or it doesn't need to be young. If you don't mind climbing, we'll take anybody that doesn't mind climbing. But generally, it's the younger people, because to get up into the crow's nest, you have to sort of bend backwards and grab above your head and then dangle and then pull yourself. I can't do it, so I let them. When I said that we're 99%, so like I said, there are 3 paid staff members. We did bring in some professionals when we needed to. All of our sails were made by Professional Rigging Co. out of Appleton, Maine, so right down the road here. And we did have to, the Coast Guard made us hire a professional caulker for everything below the waterline on the vessel. So everything below the vessel does not leak. I can't say anything for above the waterline, but everything below the waterline where it counts, it doesn't leak. And it's about community engagement. So it's doing things like every spring, although we're thinking about moving into the fall, we have a 17th century foodways event where in the morning we have speakers and demonstrators open to the public, and people come in and they're actually outside cooking the food. And then in the afternoon, we shut that down and we do a ticketed lunch for people to actually come in and eat the food, a nice luncheon that the people were outside cooking all day. We used to do community rows every Tuesday. We're thinking about bringing that back again next summer. Like I said, this summer we were in a bit of a transition period with a new executive director, so we didn't get to do much of that. And we have these full moon community suppers as a sort of a fundraiser for us, but also a way for the community to come together and spend time together with some really good food and enjoy each other. So our future plans. I'm happy to say I was able to add some future plans to this just this morning, so I got to go ahead to do that from our executive director. We really want to move into the space of being an educational site, sort of like a museum, sort of like a cultural heritage center, and expand what it is we teach. We really want to be able to make ourselves available to schools for not just regular show and tell school trips, but hands-on interactive learning programs that help the teachers sort of expand upon what they teach in the classroom, but also offer them creative ways to meet their curriculum needs per state mandates. And we want to do it for all ages. So we have middle schoolers, we have high schoolers. The high schoolers really love playing dress up in the clothes. They really do. We teach about the ship, we teach about the rigging, we teach about the clothes. Oh, no. I clicked it too many times. I'm giving away the good stuff. So this is the exciting part. We have just announced through the programming committee that we are going to be really investing in and expanding our visitor center. And what we're going to be doing is we've identified a number of our exhibits that we're going to sort of revitalize and rethink and reimagine. Then we're going to be extending sort of displays and informational things aboard Virginia herself. We'll be going for what's called a dockside attraction license. So we'll be able to bring a much larger group of people on board. Right now, we can only bring 6 people on board when she's docked, and a captain has to be present because we have what's called a 6-pack license. And we're going to be this way we'll be able to bring 25 to 30 people on board at a time with no captain present. And they'll either be able to have a docent-led tour, or they'll be able to do a self-led tour with these new information exhibits that are going to be going aboard Virginia. And then we're very excited that we have partnered with Donald Saktoma of the Passamaquoddy tribe, who's going to be doing some consulting work for us. We got our grant this past year from the Maine Humanities Council to hire a Wabanaki consultant to greatly expand our Wabanaki program offering, to talk about how they interacted with the colonists, what their life was like before they came, what it was like after, and any enduring legacy effects after that as well. And we're really hoping we can do this because this will help not just us bring people in, but help schools meet their mandate of teaching Wabanaki history as part of this whole curriculum. So it's going to be a very interesting time for growth. It's still going to be at the Bath Freight Shed at 27 Commercial Street in Bath. So it's where we are now. We're just working on sort of growing it. We have some mock-ups of what some of these things are going to be, could look like. Part of the Wabanaki, as I talked about the canoe, we're working on putting together an artist in residency program where we will actually have them build a birch bark canoe on site for us, lead programming surrounding it, give talks, become part of our visitor experience, and then we'll be able to display it as the centerpiece of this Wabanaki history exhibit. We want to do more interactive things with students, like rope making, and build a 17th century rope making jig, so they'll be able to make a piece of rope with them and then take a piece of it home with them when they leave for school. More dynamic sort of depictions of what the colonists could have looked like to show a greater idea of who these people actually were, not just the stuff they left and the names and dates and places, but the stories behind what this was all about and who these people were. And so now I got to finish this off with sort of my appeal to anybody here listening. Join the crew, help support us. Doing these projects takes a lot of support. As I said, we're 99% volunteer driven, and that takes people there doing things. But there are lots of different ways to support us. You can come down and visit the visitor center. We have a very low admission fee. It's $5 per person. If you want to take a tour, it's a $10, like have an actual guided tour, it's $10. If you want to get a guided tour aboard the ship, if she's open that day, it is $15. If you're a member, you get a much lower price point. But all of that goes towards help funding these new initiatives and making sure that we can stay operating. Volunteer, we always need volunteers, even if it's a day a month. If you want to come down, paint the side of the ship, if you want to be part of the crew, our crew is volunteer. We'll teach you how to sailor. That's a little more time investment. If you want to be one of the docents and do a day or two a month actually giving tours of the visitor center, we'd love to have you there. We are a membership organization, so we do have a bunch of tiered membership levels. You can become a member. You get free admission. You get updates on our initiatives. You get all sorts of different levels of things that helps us, but also is incentive to you to come and be there. Make a donation. We live off of donations. 90 or maybe a little bit, 75% of our funding comes from personal donations, and especially this time right now, a lot of funding sources are becoming very difficult to get because they're becoming very, very, very competitive for a number of different reasons. So donations help us a lot, and it's not just donating money. So here's, like I said, become a volunteer, be a docent. We schedules, volunteer sailing events, and we'll train you. Donate a boat. If you have an old pretty good boat that's sitting around not doing anything, nobody wants it, we will gladly take that boat. We will write you a receipt for a donation for the amount of the boat, and then we will go and we will turn around and sell it, and that helps us bring in a little bit of money throughout the year. Our executive director, Alicia Witham, she was the executive director of the Carpenter's Boat Shop in Pemaquid for 4 years, and she got really good at selling boats, so she's really good at turning around. Buy a raffle ticket. Right now we have a gorgeous, and I don't have any raffle tickets with me, I'm sorry, but you can come down to Bath, or I believe we're going to have some with us tomorrow at the Camden Windjammer Festival. But we have this great 14-foot rowing wherry that somebody donated to us, who the person who donated has a specific price point he wants us to meet. So we've decided to try to meet that price by doing it through a raffle. So we're selling raffle tickets for $25 a ticket. There's only going to be 200 tickets available, so your chances are pretty good. And then you can have this gorgeous wherry. We also have some fun things too. We have a photo contest. So if you're out and you see her somewhere, if you come to Camden tomorrow and you see her coming in the parade to sail, or on Saturday if you come aboard, snap a picture of her, send it here. We're having a photo contest. So we're gonna share them. I do believe Keith, our media guy, has a prize. Oh, there it goes. So you'll be published in the Crier, which is a local newspaper in the Bath, Brunswick area, and 2 free passes from Maine's for Ship for an onboard dockside deck tour. So you'll be able to go on and get a tour from our docents. And we also have a number of events coming up this fall. So we have a English Tea Party, which is a fundraising event for us. One of our docents is she is a fantastic storyteller, and she specializes in telling stories around tea. So she's going to be doing this great event, great for kids or grandkids. If they like tea parties, they'll love this. There's going to be all sorts of treats and music and sandwiches and tea. So we have the Downey Ship Modelers Guild is going to be doing an exhibit of model ships the last weekend of September, or the second to last weekend of September. We have a Fiber Day community involvement event. We have a full moon dinner coming up in October. And then October 25th, our sort of end of the season, is we're having a maritime music celebration. We actually have Gordon Bach's going to come play. So that was pretty cool to learn. I mean, even I know who Gordon Bach is, and I don't listen I don't listen to music like that. So, and just to finish off, I like to finish with some great shots of the ship under sail because she is beautiful. There's nothing else like this ship on the water. The chevron pattern and the red sails, the tan bark sails, really make her stick out. And that's all. These are all just pictures up and down the Kennebec here. And then that's us coming up the Kennebec, probably back from either Booth Bay or Pemaquid. And that's this picture. That's starting to go up the river coming around Fort St. George in Popham. So, and thank you for coming tonight. Any questions about anything? Yeah. We are completely independent of the Maine Maritime Museum. We're our own organization. The original idea behind Maine's first ship was that they were going to build it, and it was going to live at the Maine Maritime Museum, and it was going to be theirs. And Maine Maritime Museum said, no, thank you. So she's a lot. We're at a very interesting time right now, especially when it comes to wooden ships and wooden sailing ships. And Virginia has been designed to take people out on her. And because of a number of different events that have happened in the past 15 years, it's becoming increasingly hard for wooden sailing ships to get their full licensing. So really, right now, our best bet is going to have to be getting our dockside attraction and maybe still keeping the six-pack license to do special occasion sales on her. But the full COI, as they call it, a certificate of inspection for taking large groups of people out for long sails probably isn't going to happen. And I don't think Maine Maritime has their own ship that they used to take sails on. There was an accident a few years ago, which is one of the reasons why things have become harder. What happened with Grace Bailey 2 years ago, last year, with the mast falling off, that's made it harder. But yeah, it's not that they're very supportive of us, but they don't know what they would do with her. They're not prepared to give tours on her and things like that. They have the Mary meeting, which takes people up and down the river. So they're just like, it would just become more of a having to spend money they don't necessarily have to keep her. So. We do share publicity and brochures and things like that. So, or at least they're supposed to put them out for us. I haven't been in a couple of months. So, sometimes we have to go and double check because if they run out, they might not necessarily be like, "Hey, we're out of these." So, it's been an interesting year for everybody, especially in that area. Tourism is dropped considerably this year, so it's been a very slow year for everyone. So, we're sort of all friendly competing for people to come in and do things. But we do have a very good relationship with them. Yes, so you came in a little, it's quite all right. As I said before, in the beginning, Jamestown and Popham were sister colonies. They were the same overarching company charter for both of them. One of them was in the north, which was Popham, and one of them was in the south. So thank you for coming. I want to say anybody who is here tonight, we are going to be in Camden Saturday giving tours. If you come by and you tell me that you were here tonight, you get on for free, and we'll give you a tour of the ship for free. So all from 10 to 3, we'll be there. So, but thank you so much for coming. Please. No, we're going to be at the Camden Windjammer Festival on the public landing. So. Oh, the lineman. Oh, that's right. Yeah. So, because there's down there, and no, we're going to be. We talked to Lyman Morse about doing something with them, but they were unavailable at this time of year. It's busy time of year for them. So. Well, thank you for coming.